Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, and I've been thinking how wonderful it would have been if Freddie Mercury and Montserrat Caballé had in fact actually been given the wrong sheet music in 1987 to sing Barcelona by Stephen Sondheim. And thinking of Stephen Sondheim's company, which is where the song Barcelona comes from, it dawned on me recently that whilst musical theatre is terribly well represented on TikTok, the social media platform, it could also be argued that TikTok is terribly well represented in musical theatre, because you can argue that Stephen Sondheim invented it. Because, and here's a bit of lovely trivia for you, he wrote a song for Company, his seminal 1970s musical, which featured a dance scene called TikTok. Now, of course, in real life, he wasn't accidentally inventing the social media concept 50 years before it really came into being, and certainly not TikTok, because the spelling is different. It's the sound of a clock rather than the C-less option that you can get online. However, it is interesting to me that when you look down a list of song titles from any show, that sometimes something will jump out at you, and that's exactly what happened to me. I saw TikTok, and I thought how prescient Stephen Sondheim was. Well, it's Stephen Sondheim and indeed his show Company that we're going to be talking about in some depth today. Because today, I'm delighted to say we're going to be talking to four people behind last summer's Edinburgh University Footlights production of Company, which you could have seen at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe between the 3rd and 14th of August 2022. And of course, not unlike the reference to TikTok, which now has a brand new meaning here in the 21st century, Company as a show also has a brand new meaning in the 21st century because, as you will absolutely be aware, it has successfully allowed itself to become a show that can be done in so many different ways, including changing the gender of the central character Robert, or Bobby, or by any of the names that central character is known by their friends throughout various productions of Company. The most important of recent years being the 2019 West End version, which was the first successful version to transpose the gender of Bobby from male to female. Although there had been a version at the Edinburgh Fringe a few years beforehand. So, like so many shows of the past, and I'm going to mention my favourite Gilbert and Sullivan here again, Ruddigore, but also the Gershwins Strike Up the Band, and there are other examples, before you go in to produce these shows, and this list now includes Company, you have to pick which version you're going to go for, which makes you think about the show in advance, and of course perhaps in a different way. And it's that ability to deal with a text in different ways that makes it a classic. I would argue that Ruddigore is a classic partly because you do have to think about how you're going to do it. The same with Strike Up the Band and of course absolutely par excellence Company. And so it was my great pleasure to sit down last year with four of the people who were involved in that Edinburgh production of Company to talk about not only the production which they had put on, which was excellent, but also how they had got to it. And the people I spoke to were the two co-directors, that's Fee Simpson and Claire Nolan, the producer, Lara Sell, and the actor playing Bobby, Conor O'Quinn, who was a very thoughtful man and had a lot to say about the character of Bobby in all their incarnations. And together the four of them were absolutely fascinating, as I hope you're about to find out. So please join me for the better part of the next hour in the company of Claire, Fee, Lara and Conor as we talk about their version of Stephen Sondheim's classic but ever-changing Company.
Musical Talk.
Hi, I'm Claire Nolan and I was co-director of Company.
You are
I am co-director.
and you always shall have been.
And I'm Fee Simpson and I'm the other co-director of Co-Company.
Co-Company, I like this brand new show by Stephen Sondheim.
Yes, yeah, that well-known show.
Hi, I'm Lara Sell, and I'm the producer of our company.
Hi, I'm Connor O'Quinn, and I'm playing Bobby in Company.
Lovely. So I have 4 of the most important people. Obviously, everyone's important. It's a collaborative effort, but, forgive me, the 3 who rule, plus the one everyone's looking at on the stage, not a title character, but the character around whom this entire show revolves. I would like to talk in a minute really about actually a lot of the character work and how you came to that, because I think Robert or Bobby, and he has various names. She has had various names, let's be honest. This is a piece of work that's been growing over years and has more possibilities as such. And I find it still intriguing. I'm 427 years old and I've seen 100 versions of this. And every time I see it, I see different things. I see brand new things. I always enjoy it. But I'm always intrigued by that central dynamic, Robert and his friends, and how that works. So I would like to touch on that. But let's get down to the nuts and bolts first of all. You are the Edinburgh Footlights group, I think is correct. And obviously when one thinks of Footlights, one thinks more of sort of variety stand-up comedy. This is musical theatre, musical comedy, I suppose. But, is this what you and your group do? And how did you land on company for this year's Edinburgh Fringe offering?
Our Footlights here in Edinburgh just does musicals. So
excellent, by the way, good choice.
Obviously, we have a bunch of other societies here at the uni, but our Footlights just primarily focuses on musicals. And we kind of do one in March, and then we'll do a Fringe show, and that's kind of how we run.
So what did you do in March, just to give us a sense of your year?
We did The Wedding Singer.
Oh, right, OK, yes. Fine. Oh, well, this is different.
Yes. Yeah.
Still about marriage, though.
Yeah, still about marriage.
Good point. I like your thematic thinking.
Save on props.
So when did you decide that Company was the show that you were going to... how long has this been in gestation for you all?
So to be honest, I think sort of the process was a little bit separate from us because we have a committee, like a Fringe committee, and they decided, and I think that would have been around May that we got the formal rights, that we knew it was sort of going on. I think there were a few ideas sort of thrown about what else we could do. But I think we were quite lucky that we did get Company and that we're the only company at the Fringe, and
we landed on our feet.
Yeah. Oh yes, if you were doing the anything by Jason Robert Brown, there'd be 48 different versions of it.
I would say that this is the first Fringe after Sondheim's passing, so...
It is, and it's also the first Fringe in
important.
3 years. So, yes. Actually, I expected to see more Sondheim up here. There's an Assassins as well.
Yeah,
it had a shorter run though.
Yes, and I don't think I've seen anything else particularly. Now, there's more Gilbert and Sullivan this year, interestingly. That's really perked up, I suspect. It's out of copyright, so during a cost of living crisis, Gilbert and Sullivan are very cheap to put on. So, anyway, moving on. I like them both, by the way. Gilbert, Sullivan, and Sondheim. That's quite a range, but I like it all. So, Company in a way was selected. So, when did you join the project, each of you?
Well, they have an application process that happened. I think was it like the end of May, maybe beginning, middle, end of May, somewhere there. And you just kind of apply. They have a whole process. They send out all these applications, you fill them in, then you have an interview with the team that selected the show, and then
you're auditioned for your role, essentially. Yes,
Exactly.
whether it be performer or director, or that's interesting. And so, did you always know you were going to be co-directing?
No, we didn't.
And have you ever co-directed before with each other?
No.
You've never directed?
No,
we've never met before.
Exactly.
Crikey, in fact, yes, we still hate each other.
No, I think we were really lucky because, you went forward with a kind of team, the producer, director, musical director, and I kind of came in sort of unannounced shot in there. But no, I think we've been really, really lucky, landed on our feet, and as soon as Fee and I met, we were just completely on the same wavelength. And
so a team cohered, actually. That's it created.
Yeah.
In fact, you became a company.
It was.
There's going to be more of this, don't worry.
I think it was particularly because we didn't really want to have a choreographer because it's not a very dancey show.
No, it's a movement show if it's anything, isn't it? It's quite.
And typically Footlights will be a director, a choreographer, a producer and a musical director. But obviously we were one down, so in came Claire.
And a Sondheim is a big ask.
Yes.
It isn't the same as some other shows, which are, fabulous in their own right, but maybe not quite as layered, sophisticated, complex, actually, I think is the word. And that's not just to view, but to perform and to produce and to direct. I mean, and the musical director will also have quite a lot on their plate, I would imagine.
Yes.
It's not, sometimes scores are demanding, but I don't need to tell you this. So, Connor, when did you come on board?
So I auditioned May, I think, beginning of
Oh,
May.
so it's much the same time for everyone.
Yeah.
It happened very quickly.
It wasn't stressful at all.
And so Lara, as producer, you came on board at the same. Were you part of sort of
Yes,
These
I
sort of
was-
team?
Yeah, so I'd been sort of, just through people that we'd met, a few sort of mutual people, and then sort of went forward together, and then,
So we've got the project created, and May is not that long ago for a complex show. I appreciate you know Edinburgh because obviously you're studying here, so that must help at one level, and obviously that gives you resources locally and things like that. So it's not quite you don't have to bring your double basses up from Devon, for example.
chairs.
Yeah. Oh yeah, all painted. No, we're already talking about the painted chairs later. When you knew it was company, did you think, or what did you know of company? Each of you actually, and how what level of anxiety did you find yourself pitching in at?
I knew it was a Sondheim. I knew the revival where there was a female Bobby, but I
Yes,
didn't really
in the West End
know,
only a few years ago, quite.
But I didn't really know the show, and I think I was quite nervous coming in just purely because it is the first Fringe since Sondheim's passing. It is, I don't know, I just felt like there was quite high stakes involved, and we wanted to do it well.
Honour him.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's a very reasonable thing to do. Yeah.
But it's just a bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I think also just because we haven't done Fringe in 2 years as a society, so everyone was like, we're going to get back fighting, and we were all like, oh my god, we don't do a good job, we're in trouble. And especially considering our last couple of shows have done really well at the Fringe, I think we just really wanted to pull it off and do the best that we could with it.
Well, you have. I mean, as a layperson, I can tell you, I enjoyed it. I only review shows that I enjoy. I'm not here to put the boot in, and if I really enjoy a show, I want to talk to people about it. It's as simple as that. So this in itself is just a sign of the fact I think you've put on an 18-carat gold show essentially, and that's not just Mr. Sondheim's work. That is, it's for the more recent gloss that you've been putting on this week. No, this production has been excellent, so don't worry about that. But it is a challenge. Now, when it's a small team, the producer is not so executive, not so aloof as it might be if you were, in the West End. I'm sure, by which I'm saying that I'm sure Cameron Mackintosh doesn't actually move the scenery himself. It's a much more intimate connection, isn't it? I assume at this level. So how did you find a working relationship as two co-directors and a producer? I will be coming to you as the frontman shortly. Is that all right? So I don't want you to feel left out. So.
I mean, I think we've got quite a nice balance. I think personally. To your previous question about how well you know company, I really haven't been very well versed in musical theatre generally, so I felt like I was sort of coming from a sort of different sort of perspective on it. But I think it's been great because I feel like having co-directors, they have so many ideas sort of throwing, so there's a lot of sort of creative vision, and so I think I'm more of an admin role in that sort of sense, but it's okay because we've got enough sort of good ideas on the table.
It should never be underlooked how important that is, though. Things you say admin, but logistics is an utterly important part of any show.
None of this would have happened if you weren't there.
No.
She's the single mover and shaker.
Yeah.
Well, there you are then. There's a credit.
But we're also very lucky. We should also mention Jacob Henney and Tom Beasley are sort of on our tech side, our backstage crew. They are fantastic. They are two of the most organised people I've ever met, and they are just brilliant.
Yeah, the spreadsheets are just insane.
I like good admin. Yes. And I am going to ask you, Connor, obviously it is a slightly different thing, I assume it's a different thing, being on the stage rather than being the production team. Of course it is. But you said you joined in May. How much do you know about musical theatre? I'm guessing a bit more.
Well, yeah. So
I'm just hearing it in your voice, you see, and the Gentle Follies reference. Bang, you were in that.
I'm a bit of a Sondheim
nut
fanatic.
Yes, good. Well, it makes you a better man.
Yeah, I mean, the only Sondheim I've done before is Sweeney Todd, but I've done it 3 times. I'm like,
oh right,
yeah.
The Sweeney
really
triplets. Which were you? Or were you in different roles in each time?
Yeah, so I played Anthony the first 2 times, and then Sweeney.
Oh, you've had your murderous moment.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And you're so clean shaven, which is great.
But yeah, I sang Being Alive about 3 years ago at school as part of a music competition. So it's a very important song for me, and singing it for years, the past 3 years. And I'd seen the West End production 4 times, I think.
The recent one?
Yeah.
With Roberta? As in,
Bobby. Bobby with an IE.
Well, she was called Roberta briefly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, somewhere in the dialogue. Because obviously the great thing about the name Robert or Roberta is that there are so many variants, which also, I mean, I love that fact that it has that immediately gives you those different facets. Yeah. So you do know so actually, in a strange sense, your Bobby is more of a Sondheim aficionado than the production team. Now, can I ask, and I'm not prying here, but was Connor a resource? And did you feel like a resource, or were you we shouldn't be doing it? I'm sure you wouldn't have been like this, but but was there an issue that actually you knew more? I'm not looking for dirt. I'm looking for the collaborative process. Actually, is what I'm sort of trying to draw from.
I don't know. I feel like I came to it with like a knowledge of company that felt like we were sort of working together on the ground running, and I don't know. It feels like with all the Sondheims you can go so many of one or two ways. Like there's no fixed way of doing a show, and especially with company, it just feels very like conceptual. So you can do so much with it. So I feel like you need to have such a good like grasp of the text and the music to be able to bend it whichever way you want.
Definitely, because I remember, through the audition process, we had a few people coming in. We were looking at a few people to play Bobby, and when Connor came in, we just looked at each other and went, yeah. And it just, I don't know, I think
all that being alive has done you well.
Yeah, I think we just never really had to direct you, really. You just knew.
Yeah, I think it was great because you know the show so well, you came in knowing who your Bobby was.
Yeah.
And because it was such a short rehearsal process, because you already knew what your Bobby would be like, we didn't have to like push you to
Bobby. Yeah.
I think it's talking about like character development stuff. I just really relate to Bobby and find him very relatable, so it's not much work to do. It's just when you've got such good writing,
you
have to
flatter
you have
Sondheim,
to just honour the text.
You under-flatter yourself.
It
is, and that's right. The text must always guide, but it is quite an oblique text. I mean, shall we let's get on to, in some ways, the bread and butter of this then, if that's okay. I think you said it yourself, it's it seems to be one of the most conceptual of the shows, certainly in terms of narrative, and I'm using that in the old-fashioned sense. Follies is a conceptual show, but actually there's a much more easy-to-follow story in it. You can see the disintegration of a relationship.
It's heartbreak.
It is.
There's more drama.
Yeah, and it's actually borrowing the sort of the Candor and Ebb concept, actually, and then illustrating the drama through bringing us into a format that, in this case, Follies, a set of vaudeville-style follies, to illustrate that. Candor and Ebb made a career out of that, as we know. But company is very different. And of course, we also have to remember that after Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum in the mid-'60s, this is the first of the proper Sondheims in a strange sense. By the way, I'm going to pontificate here, and you can say, no, I think you're talking a great deal of rubbish. do please say, actually, I think differently, if you think differently. So I think this is the yardstick by which later Sondheims measured in a way.
When people started to take him seriously.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And his own light started to shine. Now, obviously, George Firth, who wrote the book, has got a lot of responsibility for this, and that's a grand thing. But it is an oblique text. And I'd like to talk about Bobby as a character, and also how you, as co-directors and producer, grapple with that. I'm particularly interested that actually you weren't particularly au fait with it. I'm going to come back to you, Connor, because I know there's going to be things to say. But if you don't know company already, and therefore haven't really become au fait with the material, whether it be the songs or the narrative, and I'll use that with the book, let's use the book. When you read it, what did you think? Did you think, how do we hook things on this? How do you direct company? Actually, is a very easy question.
To be honest,
not an easy answer. It's a lovely easy question.
I was quite excited by it.
Yeah.
I think what's great about company is there is so much you can play with, and it's not as straightforward as some shows where it's just like you go from this scene to the next.
It's not point to point.
No, I just thought it was just this amazing, fun, blank thing that we could just like.
Yeah, it was just a blank canvas, and we could just have fun with it. And I think that was kind of the heart of everything. When it sounds so cheesy, but we just wanted it to be fun and colourful, and we wanted it to be, I don't know, just a good time for people for the first time back at Fringe.
Yeah. Definitely.
But did you immediately understand Bobby? And this is a question we'll be coming back to, because I think he's a real enigma.
I think it took me a while. I think the first time I read the script, I wasn't 100% sure. And I think even through the rehearsal process, and even now I watch it and I'm like, have I changed my mind? Yeah. What am I thinking? But it is so open-ended, and it makes you question those sorts of things, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think as a person, he is quite, what's the word? I don't even know. I don't know, he's just got a lot going on, and there's a lot on his plate, and he wants some things but he doesn't want them, and I don't know, kind of like a convoluted character. Is that the way that you could put it? I don't know, but yeah, I just think there's so much to work with, and there's you can bite off a lot more than you can chew with Sondheim, and I think our 2 words that we used throughout the whole process was just simple but effective.
Yeah.
That's 3 words.
Don't want to. Simple and effective.
Sorry.
Hyphenated.
Bleak.
But I don't know, we just wanted it to be a good time, and
Certainly that.
just didn't want the story to be lost to our audiences.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's a great deal of work you've done to make the whole thing sort of cohere as a whole. You know, you mentioned chairs. Let's talk about some of the colour coding here. You know, Bobby is in the middle of this sort of constellation of friends who are all mostly... Well, he has 2 constellations, actually. A constellation of friends, and then, if you like, a small cohort of girlfriends or would-be girlfriends. And they don't actually mix that much, to be honest, or they mix through Bobby. But the couples, who are, if you like, or so it seems to me, the foundation stones of Bobby's life... potentially, although once again you can discuss whether or not that's true, but let's take it as it first appears. You've delightfully but not overwhelmingly colour-coded them. So there will be similar colours. You know, a pink shirt will be matched by a sort of a cerise blouse, or, you know, and you know, there's light blue and dark blue in another couple, and you know, there's the green couple if you want. You know, it starts to turn into a game of Cluedo actually at one level, but not in any unsubtle way. And actually, there's also a very nice set of directorial decisions, I think, where the cast are all on the stage all the time. Now, I appreciate there's no wings in most of the performance spaces in Edinburgh, so you can't have them off anyway. But they sit on colour-coded chairs for themselves, but they also face away from the audience when they're not in action, shall we say. And I also like the symbolism of that, or what I take to be the symbolism of that, which is that they have their own lives, and whilst they make Bobby feel that, or try to make Bobby feel, or they themselves feel that Bobby is a big part of their lives, he's also not a big part of their lives, because they've got their lives sorted, whether they're happy or unhappy. And so I think that's really beautifully represented by the fact that they've actually got their back to us, the audience, and therefore to Bobby, centre stage, all the way through it. These decisions were really interesting to me. How did they come about?
Well, I think I knew that I wanted to have everyone on stage the whole time, and then I told Claire that straight.
Better than having no one on stage all the time.
Yes.
Shouting in from the wings.
But I thought that it would be quite nice because obviously you've got that scene with April that happens. I don't know if you noticed, but they were then watching him at that point. And it just creates, I think if you're having everyone on stage, it has to be purposeful.
Yeah. Judging, I think, rather than watching, if I may say. Yes,
so I just think if the ensemble are doing something, they have to be doing it for a reason. It has to communicate something to the audience. And it creates like a private space when they're facing the back, and then when having them like watching that scene with April kind of shows how they're all kind of like watching Bobby and
looking out for him, but also at the same time looking out for themselves. I mean, it's good Sondheim stuff, and Firth. You know, it's not as clear as it first thinks. You think, oh, that's what they're doing, and then you think, oh no, there might be this other meaning, and then you think, oh no, there might be this third meaning. Or, you know, I love it. You know, it's like a snowflake under a microscope. There's so many different bits of design and delight in it, and then you look at it again from a different angle, and there am I. You just think, oh, it's amazing. Other decisions, by the way, forgive me. There's always a moment in whatever version of, I think it's a difficult scene, and it's the where Bobby and April are basically in bed having sex scene. And it can be gratuitous. I don't mean as in. I've seen titillating versions of it. I've seen very chaste versions of it. I've seen versions where they found sort of imagery to create it, and they did something quite different again in the London version of a couple of years ago, where with the female Bobby, the IE Bobby. They sort of did an iterative versions of what her life would be. It was very strange. I mean, but it's an important scene. It's a difficult scene. It puts Bobby through the ringer. But it's also terribly difficult to direct and stage, it seems to me. I really liked what you did, which was the subtle... I like the subtlety of it. So, if I may, you know, Bobby and April, I'm looking at you, Connor, as though you are Bobby. But you are. Today you are. They've been talking, and it's obvious that bed is looming. And then other members of the cast bring up a blanket, so it's the upstanding bed concept that we see on stage.
Tracy Turnblad.
Yes. Yeah. You do know your stuff. And up come the blankets, or up comes the blanket, and then there's sort of movement behind the blanket to symbolise Congress. But actually, the subtlety of it is that basically everyone's hidden behind the curtain, and then briefly your head comes up, Connor, as Bobby, wearing April's stewardess hat, and that immediately says so much. There's been physical movement, so it suggests what it suggests, but just the hat suggests playfulness, it suggests adventurousness, it suggests everything in one. I love the fact that essentially what is presumably in real life would be a naked sex scene has been suggested by a costume change. That is magnificent. That is the absolute reverse of what a lot of people would do, and I think works the better for it, in my opinion. I really like that. It was just, your head came out, it got a laugh, but it said so much. So it was playful for us as an audience, but it was playful, it suggested playfulness in the bedchamber. I'm sorry, terribly puritanical.
I agree, and like the actress playing April, Olivia, me and her know each other very well and very comfortable with each other, so
same
there would
hat
never
size.
be never be any awkwardness with us, but it was very much just like there's no need for even like a kiss or anything, because it's all there, and like
it's obvious.
Just put up the blanket and the audience can.
I think it was definitely a bit that it was when we first sat down, it was actually one of the things that we talked about, because when I first the script, I was like, this is a bit that I'm not going to know what to do with, because I think we knew that we wanted it to be really fun and playful, and I think if we stuck that scene in and made it something really, I don't know,
it can unbalance the piece. That's the point, because it's not actually about sex. The show,
no.
Sex is a part of it, but it isn't, is it at all?
So I think we wanted it to just be fun and playful, and then we thought of this like upstage bed, and to give Connor and Liv, who plays April, the credit. They were brilliant.
Sorry.
They were absolutely brilliant to work with, because we kind of, I showed them the idea of like the bed, and then they kind of just ran with it. So they were brilliant to work with on that scene.
Well, I mean, it is also in the performance. I'm not suggesting it's just a costume change, but it really, it was a clever idea, beautifully executed, and came across. It came across in waves, actually, and didn't unbalance the piece. I mean, that is it's knowing when to stop. Everything is a spectrum, isn't it? Too little, too much, just right. It's the Goldilocks zone, I suppose, if you want in. Also a musical. Is it by Roy Anderson? I think it is. It's very obscure and featured Lucille Ball in the 1950s. Don't worry, I'm an old man. So yes, lots of beautiful directorial touches, if I may say, and I think that it came across as a quality production and a thought-through production. It's as you said, you had a relatively clean slate to work with in terms of the script. I noticed you went for what I'm going to call the hybrid classic script, if that makes sense, because obviously it's Bobby's a fellow, and we'll have to talk about why that decision was made. And then I want to talk Bobby. Bobby is what I want to talk. As you can see, I'm obsessed, my apologies. But also, it doesn't have the more recently added, by more recently I mean from the 90s, they reinserted basically a sort of, there's a gay suggestion line where one of Bobby's friends sort of propositions him, or at least it's moving in that direction. And that's been an interesting new flavour and colour into the piece. Now that wasn't in this version, and it hasn't been in that version. That was an addition in the 90s, so you might like to call it the classic version, and yet at the same time, the fabulous trio has got the modern lyrics, and quite rightly so, because there is an unfortunate bit of contemporary casual homophobia in You Could Drive a Person Crazy. It's the rhyme with I understand a person if it I can't remember the exact lyrics, something like if it's not a person's bag, I can understand a person if a person was a fag, which in the 1970s, I know, it sits very heavily now, doesn't it, on the ear. It's not a comfortable line, and bearing in mind what we now know of Sondheim, of course, because he wasn't out in the 70s. And it was just casual slang. I mean, I'm not apologising for it, but it's authentic in that sense. But it doesn't sit well now. That's been removed. You brought in the new lyrics. So I suppose textual changes. How did you come to your decisions? I mean, some of them are fairly obvious. But why a male Bobby first?
Well, it was all a rights thing, honestly.
No, but that's a perfectly good logistical answer, isn't it? I mean, if that's what you're being asked to produce.
We did try. I think it was one of those things that we kind of, it's a bit more, we've got some really, really talented girls in this university, so we were like, gives a good chance, but then also at the end of the day, like, it's a timeless piece regardless,
and there's no wrong answer either. I mean, it can be either.
Definitely. But yeah, it was down to not being able to get the rights.
Well, no, your honesty is marvellous. I will say, I've seen before the London version, which was the Broadway version, come over essentially. Patti LuPone, I think, came over and did both.
Yeah, London one went to Broadway.
Oh, did it that direction? Yeah.
I've just finished on Broadway.
Oh, well, they got a longer run then, didn't they? Quite. Mark, they probably had 2 years off for COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
There was in Edinburgh a couple of years before that version an unauthorised.
Yes, I know. I've heard about this.
Yeah, I saw it.
Right.
Didn't quite work because they didn't. With the greatest respect to the people behind it, they hadn't quite worked out what the permutations therefore would have to be to make it work. Because it's very heteronormative, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a criticism. Once again, it is what it is. It's a product of its time, and that time is now over half a century ago. That seems unbelievable. But because the couples are all ostensibly straight, changing the sex but not changing the other characters, then you're in a whole world of permutations, and there's nothing wrong with those permutations. But but you have to work out how you can get a consistency. And actually, therefore, what happened was that the Bobby IE, if you like, wasn't quite consistent. And you could say, well, hang on, everything's a spectrum. Of course it is. But actually, in terms of the narrative, it was confusing, because it essentially looked like she was sleeping with everybody. or it was difficult to work out her motivations. And of course it sexualises the piece away from relationships per se, or it has that possibility. So it really did need to be thought through very cleverly, and I actually think that the London production worked. And it's a perfectly legitimate version of the company. I love seeing different aspects of the same thing. Sorry, I'm
That's all right.
dragging myself on again. But, so obviously rights made it the thing it is.
Yes.
Well, that's good. And so the script that came to you had all those changes in it.
Yes.
The new lyric, but not the gay reference. It's interesting what's in and what's out at different times. Actually,
Yeah.
I mean, once again, it reflects the zeitgeist of the period you're doing it in. The 90s were a long time ago now, and at the time that seemed quite forward. But it's interesting, it's disappeared again. So it's obviously a flavour that they currently isn't wanted. There we are. We are where we are.
I was just going to say about the London production. I had obviously fallen in love with that production, and talking about gender switching, they also switched the gender of Amy to
Andy, was
Jamie.
it? Oh, Jamie.
So
Well,
it
it's
was
better rhyme, isn't it?
Jamie and Paul.
Yeah.
Andy was April. So the girlfriends became boyfriends. But
Your memory's terrible.
yeah, it was. Well, yeah, I just love this production. But they made Jamie and Paul, so it was a gay couple. And if you were going to gender switch it, I would have wanted to be Jamie. But then my reservations about playing Bobby were people seeing Company after seeing the gender switch, which worked so well, and people saying, "Oh, we'd never have a male Bobby again."
Yeah.
I was like, "Yeah, I kind of agree." 'Cause I've seen the female one, and talking about that scene with April. In my imagination, seeing a man play that role, it would have been very creepy and a bit like he's taking advantage of her. So I think, I hope the way that we're doing it is quite delicate, and nuanced to really try and make Bobby quite a nice, but
He's probably nicer now.
With flaws.
Oh, yes.
But a flawed but nice guy.
I think that's the context, though. There's much better. I mean, there's still a long road to go in everything, but the 21st century is. Ignore what the Daily Mail says. The 21st century is better than the 20th century. And in 1970, when Company first came out, Bobby probably wasn't a very nice man, and probably was sexually exploiting a number of women. The amount of affection or not is not always clear, and can be done once again in different ways. So, but I agree with you. Trying to make Bobby sympathetic or understandable is a really essential part of what it is. And actually, you want Company to, that was written in 1970. I had no expectation that what we were seeing, what I saw yesterday, was anything other than now, contemporary. Maybe not many mobile phones, but that's the only thing that feels really different. You can tell me you actually did set it in 1970, but to me it felt, it's universal enough to have been yesterday, as it actually was for me. So let's talk about Bobby. And I'm actually going to start with you, Connor, but I will want to hear everybody's view. How do you see Bobby? What are his motivations, his or hers, but in this case yours? Your Bobby.
So
no wrong or right answers. Remember that.
That's the thing. An enigma, to be honest, at the centre of it all, because all the other characters, I think, are so clear-cut, and
they found themselves.
Yeah, I wouldn't say stereotypes, but they're all, very
archetypes.
Archetypes,
yes.
Exactly. All very clear-cut, written in a specific way, all together, and they've all got their scenes, and Bobby just floats through them all.
Floats is an interesting word.
Yeah. Well, I my view on the piece is that it all happens in Bobby's head, and
when he's blowing out his candle at the beginning, by any chance?
Yeah, at the end. Yeah.
Oh, well, there's a lot of blowing out of candles.
Yeah.
But yes.
So the reason, in my interpretation of it, is that because he can't blow it out, it's because it's not real. It's just him not actually wishing something. So from the beginning to the end, I think the whole thing is in his head and like visions, and then he decides to not turn up to the birthday party at the end. And as Fee was saying, like, I think the more times I do it, the more like epiphanies and little visions of who Bobby is come to me. But I think the biggest thing Bobby realises is that he's putting so much effort into like supporting all the couples around him and being the third person, the
Shall be the three of us.
Yeah, just looking after everyone else. All that energy he's putting into supporting them, he can put into someone else and be one of the couples himself.
Can I ask, therefore, and I might ask this to everyone, is it your conclusion that at the end of your version of Company, Bobby has found himself and wants to sincerely get married in his own right, not because other people are pressing him? Is that the path? I know it might be a different question if I ask you tomorrow. Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like he's resigned to the fact he's never get married. Sometimes I think he's like, well, I do think that he's like, right, he's understood how to give himself to someone else, and he's willing to do that and to be vulnerable with someone else. I think I'd like to think that Bobby goes off and finds someone and actually has a decent marriage and relationship with them.
I would like to think, though, that you're caging this so interestingly,
but
it's clearly.
Well, there's also another element to it, talking about the gay thing. Like, I think it would be wrong of me to dismiss that I do think... I'm not saying Bobby's gay, but I think there's...
It's an interpretation.
In the text, there's everyone saying, have I got a girl for you? Bobby ought to have a woman. Like, all the couples are saying he needs to have a woman. And the only song when Bobby really talks about women is someone is waiting, just like all the women in my life. But it doesn't mean it has to be a woman.
Could be the same emotional connection, of course.
Exactly. And at the end he says somebody. It's less about sexuality. It goes beyond sexuality and gender. It's more just having someone to look after and to share his life with.
Well, you preempted one of my questions, because I think it is a valid interpretation that is Bobby gay. It's a valid question. And I have yet to make my mind up. I've got a slightly different conclusion on Bobby to you, I think. But actually, I'd like to hear what other people think as well, and then we'll carry on. Thank you, by the way. That was genuine, and I want to probe more, by the way.
I mean, I think mine is pretty much the same. I think in terms of, like, in the end, does he get married, does he not? I think it's just kind of, you see, like, his thought process, you see all his interactions, and when you leave him at the end of the show, I think as an audience, you just kind of got to leave him and hope. I think it's quite a nice thing that you're just kind of there, like, well, he's learned all of this, he's made all these discoveries. Will he, won't he? But at least you were there on that journey with him.
So it's the route, the journey is, but it's still quite difficult to see because I don't know what the outcome is. So, and if you don't know where he is at the end, that's quite a difficult journey to sort of describe for you as directors and you as an actor, but also for us as an audience. So I accept, I mean, you're right, it is a journey of discovery, but what the discoveries take him to, I think is still oblique. But can I ask?
I think
it's like blind date, same question. So number one, please.
I view Bobby, I think there's so much going on throughout the entirety of the show that I think he's almost kind of going through the sensory overload where he doesn't know what he wants. There's so much going on. He's in the middle of New York. There's just a constant flurry of activity, be that in his relationships or where he's going or what he's doing. And at the end, I think being alive is him coming to peace with himself and his relationship with himself, be that he may be gay or he may be wanting a loving relationship. I just find being alive, like you say, the hopeful kind of end to the storyline, to the through line, that I see it as he's finding himself and he becomes more at peace with himself. That's how I view it.
Peace, you see, once again, being at peace. I think I like that interpretation because I like the idea of him finding peace through his discovery. But once again, it's what does that peace mean? Well, let's do it. Same question to number 3, please.
I think, to be honest, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think for someone who didn't know the show as well, I think the clear parts of, like, I'd say sort of shifts in Bobby's attitude come in sort of the 3 sort of solos, I suppose. But that's quite a sort of superficial way of looking at it, but I feel like that's sort of what I would relate to. I also think there's the really beautiful bit in, I think it's Thos, where he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, the love that he has for Bobby, and he talks about, like, is it in Someone Is Waiting when he's sort of saying, have I missed them and did I let them go? But then it was saying that maybe another person has also done that. And I think, like, I always think a bit of, like, for context, I feel like being 35 and unmarried probably, you know, back then would be more shocking, and I think now you could probably think that there'd be something different, being like, it's
Get
not
over
actually
it.
the end of the world. And I think there's something to think that, like, maybe if it was more sort of modern sort of perspective on it, you'd think, yeah, well, there's still loads of time, you can meet different people in relationships, and I think for Bobby now, I would think it would probably be more of a, about like himself sort of opening up for some potential rather than like it being a disaster situation.
But it must feel odd, I suppose, if you are the only single one amongst your circle of friends who are all in couples. You know, I can relate to that. I'm a single man. I have been all my life because I like it. This is one of the reasons I think Bobby's quite an interesting character. I can see I can project. I mean, Bobby is also a character onto which one projects yourself or your thoughts. And that's quite difficult, I think, for an actor, because actually he's not a cipher at all. He's a character in his own right, but there is his friends project on him. I like the fact that in the relationship you see with the friends, he has different roles with them all, and that actually suggests a sort of chameleon character, and a chameleon character is a hiding character. So, for example, there's that early scene, isn't it, where he's constantly being told off for asking questions, but in the next scene where he's with a different couple, they are asking him questions for the most part. And then there's another scene where actually the couple are merrily chatting away to themselves, having a fight, and Bobby is essentially watching. And in other scenes, forgive me there, I'm doing it again. Bobby is a referee kind of character. You know, he has different functions in each of the different relationships, or so it seems to me. And a multifaceted character would have that, but also a character that's hiding in plain view would do that, it seems to me. I don't think Bobby's gay, usually. I sometimes do. Once again, it depends on the performance and the production. But actually, in 1970 America, being gay was still unusual. And certainly, you know, there's a lot of things don't move on for 20, 30 years. So he would have, you know, if he were a closeted gay man, he would be looking potentially for marriage, but not wanting the marriage to a woman, because actually it wouldn't bring him happiness. And there we are. That is actually what we're seeing. So I see that interpretation. I'm not sure I always buy it, but in your conclusion is that he does, and in your production, and you all seem to be saying this journey of discovery, forgive me if I'm misinterpreting you, makes you think that he probably is he's come to terms with himself in a way, whatever that is, and is probably looking for a marriage, whatever kind of marriage that is.
Yeah.
It's funny because I'm going to tell, please.
Well, I don't know, less of like a marriage and more just
a relationship.
Somebody,
connection.
You're right.
A person to love, someone to love him, and also him to love.
That's
because all the girlfriends are all just quite superficial. They're loving him, and he hasn't put anything into them. I think that's quite. He really hits deep with him. You
do a lot of very good pensive acting. There's quite a lot of it when you're. It's quite interesting. I was looking at your face quite a lot. I don't mean in a stalking way.
No,
I'm taking it home in audience. A bag. But I was. To me, it appeared to me you were doing quite a lot of. I'm watching this scene as an observer in the moment, or I'm thinking about what's going on. I could see Bobby doing analysis all the way through. I could see Bobby thinking all the way through. I could see Bobby trying to absorb all the way through, or so it seemed. But I could also see Bobby in a slightly neutral way. As you say, those relationships with the cohort of girlfriends, you know, they're friendly. In fact, I think the most telling point about the girlfriends thing is there's the one who's he's itching to go to a party, and she's taking him up to the beauty spot, exactly, and to tell him that she's moving away from New York, and he's obviously upset about that. But there's a point about them being friends. They sort of got through the romantic phase, if there ever was a romantic phase, or the sexual phase, and they're now friends. And I think that's quite an interesting point as well. That actually what Bobby, I think, needs is a proper best friend, which of course is difficult to have if all your friends are in couples.
Well, yeah, he says,
and that's other relationships.
Marry me a little, you can be my best friend.
Yes.
Which is what he's seeking. But then he realises you can go beyond that. Well, I just think Marry Me a Little, like, it's almost there. You can hear it in the music. It doesn't fully resolve. It's reaching, and then finally being alive. It's like it feels like a complete piece. Whereas Marry Me a Little just sort of lingers, and he knows that he's saying he's ready, but he's not.
No. And that's the question. He does say that all the way through. And I'm still not convinced he's ready at the end myself. I want to talk briefly about Marry Me a Little. You'll be aware of this, I guess, but forgive me if you're not, but you'll be aware that Marry Me a Little is the first version of the song that is now being alive. Yeah, in fact, there's another one as well, isn't there? There's Happy Ever After, I think it's called, in Hell.
It's quite similar lyrics to Being
They
Alive,
share some,
but
different tones.
I think it was Marry Me a Little first, and then they removed that.
And then they put it back in again, because it didn't used to be in 20, 30 years ago. So it's another thing that's been added. But they don't put Happy Ever After. There's a much bitterer song.
There's another one as well, Multitudes of Amy's.
That's another cut song, isn't it? Yes.
So in the first version of Company, I think, Bobby ends up with Amy at the end. He goes through Act 2 is him going through all the couples' houses and finally reaching Amy and singing the song to Amy. And just, it's not right.
No. That is why that's not being performed.
Yeah.
But it's been a work in progress, and actually those progressions also suggest that actually the story is still cooking, or it has been cooking for a long time. I just want to briefly explain why I'm not yet so convinced that Bobby is ready to marry. I think it's when Joanne says, you're always there looking in through the window at the party without being at the party. You know, we see that figuratively. You're itching to get to the party when you're on the hill with Kathy, but you don't get there. I mean, that's an actual thing. Joanne's observation, I think, is very telling. And then the very next party, of course, is the birthday party, if it's a real one. And he doesn't come. And I thought actually the female Bobby IE version in London played that very well. She actually is on the stage watching the party taking place, looking in wistfully, and I concluded from that. Funny, that was that version that helped me solidify, I think, my current thinking, and let's all meet again in a year and discuss it again, that actually I think Bobby has decided that marriage isn't for him, and he's going to actually watch, because he's being pressured into it by his friends. He does sort of give his friends the bird in a way, or tries to change that relationship. That's interesting as well, He's been their plaything, and it is him setting off on his own. But actually, whether that leads to marriage, I'm not yet convinced. I don't think Bobby wants marriage ultimately. Myself, I think being alive is a realization of something that's missing in his life. But actually, you either have it or you don't have it. A relationship. Once again, I can never get a handle on Bobby. He's I'm going to say he's like an entirely oiled man, in the sense he keeps falling out of your, you grasp, and there he sort of shoots off again. And once again, these are terrible phrases. I'm not sure I'm describing this at all. But you get my drift.
I just think what's so beautiful about him is that he's so open to interpretation.
Yeah.
From a director's point of view, from an actor's point of view, there's so much to work with, and you can play about with it and have so much fun with it.
It'd be terrible if you didn't agree, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you... Oh, go on. Spill those beans.
I think that's the thing. Like, the story is the story, and the audience take what they want from it. Some people coming up to me say, "Oh my God, Bobby kills himself at the end."
Really?
Yeah. Right. Not one person, like multiple people.
Multitudes of suicide lovers, as the song was cut.
Well, a lot of and I've heard that before. I played Bobby, like people saying, "Being alive," and that's the end.
So he ultimately rejects being alive.
Yeah, well, he's worked it all out. He's the fountain of knowledge. But no, I don't think that.
No, I don't think that.
But and then the other two interpretations is that he goes with one of the girlfriends, or he's gay, isn't ready for marriage, is ready for marriage. Again, I think that's just people projecting themselves onto Bobby.
Yeah, definitely.
Isn't that curious? And yet, here we are, 52 years after it was written, still talking about the character of Bobby, which, no one's talking that way about the King of Siam. Just randomly picking a character from musical history. Possibly from a slightly different era, but you get the idea. Yeah. But even Sweeney Todd, actually, Sweeney Todd's character, and you know this, and I picked him deliberately, but obviously you can interpret that in lots of different ways, but his narrative is more tight. And he's got an arc.
His intentions are clear.
Yes,
he wants revenge.
Yes, his intentions are clear. That's interesting. Bobby doesn't have an I Want song. And is Being Alive an I Want song? I mean, it's an interesting idea, isn't it? Because a musical, you would normally have a kind of 11th hour number, and then the resolution. And the I Want song would normally come right at the beginning, and Bobby doesn't have that. And if Marry Me a Little at the end of that one, I suppose, and it was an addition, is a kind of I Want song, being alive is, I understand song, maybe, and a bit of an I want. Do you think of it as an I want song? I mean, but it's in the wrong place, if that makes sense.
The second half of it, I think, goes towards an I want. Somebody hold me too close.
Keep me company.
Yeah. Nice bit of title placing there. Thank you. I'm sorry I apologise if that seemed a bit pontificatey.
No.
But actually, as you can see, I'm still wrestling at my exalted old age. Well, let you know, you've got 50, 60, 70 years worrying about this. You'll be pleased to know, because I think the word was enigma was used earlier, wasn't it? And that is still the case. And I still think it's striking and odd that a really successful piece has this kind of. And he's not a void. That's the point. It's not an empty space. There is something there, but that something is still undefined, or can be undefined. I really like your interpretation. I really bought into it. I think buying into Bobby is the way the audience get in. So I should say mini fist pumps are currently taking place. So let's get back to the production slightly. I mean, we were talking earlier about the chairs and the symbolism of actually people sitting away from the audience. That's also, I said, it's very striking, works very well. How is that to act with?
Well, my interpretation of your direction is that it feels like at the very beginning of the rehearsal process, I think we were talking a lot about I think in the script it says offstage voices. Is it at the beginning? It doesn't say company until company, the song. So it feels like it's going to get a bit head acty now. But
I'm in.
It feels like us as actors walking onto the stage and then becoming the characters. So double barrel meaning of company being company you keep, and then a company of actors. And I think that's what the chairs to me say, and putting them all to the side, it feels like everyone's watching their fellow actors, they're supporting. It's like an acting exercise. It's not just to serve the story, it's also to serve the craft of acting.
That thematically connects with a funny thing happened on the way to the forum, of course, because it is specifically a group of actors putting on the show, particularly the stage version. They come on, and you're being told by the actor who's going to play Pseudolus that it's a comedy tonight, and then and the proteans, the characters who do everything, are theatrical devices, and overtly so. That's really interesting. We're playing this game, sorry. There's another flavour as well in the text, where very early on, one of the girlfriends keeps shouting, "Taxi, taxi." I don't know how much you're aware of this, but Sondheim's very first theatrical position was supporting the original version of Allegro in 1948 or something like that, when he was a very young man, which was written by his sort of stepfather, his pseudo-stepfather, Oscar Hammerstein and Richard Rogers. Sadly a great failure, but it's a great show. It was on in London a few years ago as well. And there's a character in that as a nurse who's very keen on the central character, Joe. And his life story is from birth to the age of 35. I'm sure that won't have been lost on you. And it isn't, there is and she has the best song in that, which is "The Gentleman is a Dope," whilst looking for a taxi in the rain. She keeps calling out, "Taxi, taxi." And here you have the character Joe, who gets to 35, and having been in the big city, decides it's not for him. He's having to make decisions about where to live and what his role is. And then you get 25 years later, Stephen Sondheim, the protege of Oscar Hammerstein, writing company with a 35-year-old character in the city. You can take it or not take it, but I love that. I think this is not the sequel to Allegro, but it's in the multiverse of musical theatres, which will surely come. That seems to me a connection that you can take. Sorry, yeah, I'm definitely a terribly dull man.
It's so interesting. Yeah.
You're very, very kind, but I am still a dull man. Right, let's talk a little bit about how can people follow your organisation. And what would you like to do next? What are your ambitions? Do you have theatrical ambitions?
Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug here.
Yeah, please do. That's what this is for.
At the Fringe, I've written a one-man play that I'm acting in myself, opening
shortly.
In 6 days. And Claire, here, one of the directors, is a voice in it.
Oh, right. Voices of?
Yeah.
Yes, as we've established, is very...
I'm actually a nurse, funnily enough.
You are really? Oh, Oscar Hammerstein would be so pleased. What's it called? What's it called?
Yeah, sorry.
Please, come on.
It's called Looking for Fun, and it's at La Belle Angèle from the 20th to 22nd of August at 5 p.m.
Thank you, that's really good. I'm delighted to hear. And do you have other shows that you're involved in, or are you now just punters going to the shows?
Yeah, just going to them from now on. Yeah, that's the plan.
Throwing up inspiration.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Footlight's next show is Bring It On.
Yes.
Starts in February, so...
Yeah.
I don't know that at all.
It's like a cheerleading...
Yeah, it's
based on the...
Very
colourful
fun.
explosion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that will be brilliant. We've got a really good team on that already.
Sounds different.
Yes. Yeah, but I feel like Footlights does,
but it should
everything in between.
Yeah. But that's what you want. I mean, it would be terrible if it only did Sondheim. It would be terrible if it only did brash musicals. It'd be, I'm not saying any of these are brash, but this is what I like about musical theatre. People think, musical theatre is this. No, musical theatre is all theatre.
Yeah.
And it can represent all theatre. It can be, it can be heavy, it can be light, it can be, people go jazz hands. Yeah, there's an element of that, but it's not just that. And remind me again of the name of the organisation who's put this on.
Well, I think just supporting the Edinburgh University Footlights. It's a great theatre company and society. It's brilliant. We're all self-funded, so every profit that we make during the show goes just to the next show. So if you ever see that we're doing anything, come and support. And the talent at this university is amazing.
Yeah.
So
lovely.
Two other things that we would mention. So we are fundraising for the show and Footlights through our Kickstarter. And if you just type up Edinburgh University Footlights Presents Company, it should be on there. Any donations greatly appreciated. We're also partnered with an Edinburgh-based charity, You Evolve, which is supporting young individuals in sort of mental health struggles and sort of promoting resilience and like loads of really good stuff. And
worthy.
Exactly. So any donations would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to you all for giving up time to speak to me today. Thank you so much for being so interesting. It was a marvellous show, and it was a marvellous production of that show, so I enjoyed it from first to last. I've really enjoyed talking to you about it, so once again, thank you very much, and with luck I shall see you in various forms in various years at the Fringe and beyond.
Thank you very much.
so much. Thank you. Yeah.
Musical Talk. And there we are. That was Claire Nolan and Fee Simpson, both of whom were the co-directors of that version of Company, Lara Sell, the producer, and the thoughtful Connor O'Quinn, who was Bobby, in the 2022 Edinburgh University Footlights version of Stephen Sondheim's perennial Company. And it was a real joy to talk to them and, through the courtesy of listening back to this episode, hearing them again. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, Sondheim is assuredly a legend of Broadway, a legend of musical theatre, and quite rightly so. And I suspect, although he didn't much like the lyrics of Noel Coward, he's going to fall into that category in the history of musical theatre as one of those people who was so distinct and individual and appreciated for what they did that their work is going to continue to live on. And indeed, a number of Sondheim shows are coming to London in the next year, including the quite rarely done Pacific Overtures. And that's going to be quite an interesting show to see. So do keep your eyes open, your ears peeled, or the other way round, peel your eyes and keep your ears open. Really, as long as there's some way of getting the information into your bonce, it really doesn't matter which orifices you use, up to a point, Lord Copper. And hopefully you'll get a chance to see or hear a Sondheim coming up in the future. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Musical Talk. As you probably know, there are quite a lot in the catalogue. We have been running for well over 16 years now, and very shortly we reach our 800th episode, so I do hope you'll stick around to listen to that, where we have something a little unusual lined up, and it's rather fun. But for the time being, I think everybody needs to be released back into the wilderness to do their own thing, including me. So I'm going to toddle along, and I'm going to ask you to do much the same, and therefore I'm going to find a way of finishing this conversation with a kind of conversational full stop, a word that brings it all to a nice end, but in a way that's satisfactory for all. And you know what that word is as well as I do, and here it is coming up. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2023. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos.
It's all part of the Edinburgh experience, by the way. We'll just plough on. If someone comes through playing the trombone, we'll stop. But otherwise, this is a public right of way, isn't it? It shows people we were there. Lord knows I was there, as I actually say in Follies. So there we are. Yes, showing your work. Right.